This series of videos is being created to remind the world of the 100-year era between when the Civil War ended and the Civil Rights Movement came to pass. Most of these stories are gruesome, despicable, and horrific, but they need to be told in order for certain critics of present-day political agendas to have an accurate representation of what life was like for blacks after slavery. Too often there's an almost purposeful ignorance, a contempt for those of color, and a stain on the true horrors that African Americans faced daily. A life without justice, a life of oppression, a life without safety. These are their stories. In the year 1908, a vicious dispute broke out among landowners near the southwestern border of Kentucky and the northwestern corner of Tennessee. Between three counties, Fulton in Kentucky, as well as Obion and Lake counties in Tennessee, the unrest began to emerge over the land rights to a well-known lake known as Reelfoot. Reelfoot Lake, which stretched through the neighboring states, was a local fishing spot in the early 1900s and had been so for generations. Rural landowners began to grow in opposition, however, to an organization known as the West Tennessee Land Company. This company, mostly comprised of investors, sought to split up the land, which included Reelfoot Lake, and as a result of the outcry, a group of men made up of hometown farmers who were eager to fight back against the sale was formed. They called themselves the Night Riders, and they took pleasure in terrorizing any rural homes that took part or supported the division of their beloved fishing spot. This is how the murder of David Walker and his entire family began. One man among many who were targeted by the Night Riders was a man named David Walker. David was a married landowner with a wife and 5 children, and he built the log cabin that sat upon his 21-acre plot. Though David was legally allowed to own property at this point in history, many local white communities and surrounding Hickman County were diabolically opposed to any farmer that would stand in their way of salvaging Reelfoot Lake, being especially unforgiving if that farmer happened to be black. In the days leading up to the family's massacre on their own property, a rumor began that David was being a, quote, surely Negro, end quote, according to the Courier-Journal, the newspaper. It was claimed that Mr. Walker was having a discussion with a white woman, and he swore at her. In 1908, the country was well into adapting Jim Crow customs within society. David would have been well aware of the consequences if he should ever do such a brazen, yet realistically minor, offense. Nonetheless, when the Night Riders heard of this rumor, they banded together in a group of roughly 45 white men, and they set off to Walker's family home. When the mob arrived, they demanded that David come out of the house. With a wife and a newborn baby, along with 4 other children inside, David refused the Night Riders' call to go with them. Upon realizing that Walker was not going to go down without a fight, several members of the posse began dumping oil onto the cabin, with the family still inside. That's when the match was lit. With embers burning up towards the night sky, a terrified Walker understood that he needed to save his family more than he needed to save himself. At that, he went to the front door to face the Night Riders who were waiting outside for him. He opened the door. Bullets began penetrating David immediately. He fell to the ground just outside his front door, where he moaned in agony while bleeding to death. Only seconds passed before David took his final breath. The gunshots subsided only to reveal the bellowing screams of David's wife upon accepting that her husband had just been murdered. The protection of her children was solely upon her at this point, and she approached the door to plead for mercy with the infant daughter in her arms. When she was visible in the doorway, a single shot broke the silence from the group of Night Riders. The bullet passed through the infant's body entirely, killing it instantly, and then a second shot was fired, which pierced the abdomen of Mrs. Walker. She fell to the ground in a heap, with her dead child still in her arms. She bled to death right next to her husband. Without parents to guide their escape, 3 of the younger Walker children attempted to flee from inside their burning home. As each child ran out of the front door, leaving the billowing black smoke behind them, they were shot by this firing squad of white men. One by one, each little life was snuffed out in hatred as the children were trying to save their own lives from burning to death. Walker's oldest teenage son, however, decided to stay inside the house as it went up in flames around him. With his parents and all of his siblings now dead in a matter of minutes, the young boy realized that the last decision he would ever make was choosing which way he wanted to die. He would rather burn alive than to submit to the barbaric murderers in his own front yard. After news of the massacre was nationally available through papers in the following days, the governor of Kentucky made a call to bring the murderers to justice for such an unspeakable crime. Governor Augustus E. Wilson was quoted as saying, "If 2 or 3 men had gone to this poor cabin and murdered this family, the crime would have shocked humanity with the revelation of incredible weakness, brutality, and dastardly cowardice. That a larger number, some 50 men, joined in such a crime multiplies its cowardice and wickedness 50-fold, and makes every member of the band guilty of murder in the first degree." End quote. But the demand for justice was ignored, as each of the night riders vowed to remain silent on the issue. As with too many lynching stories, no arrests or prosecutions ever took place. The group of 45 murderers went free to live out the remainder of their lives without ever serving even a single day in a jail cell. While the smoldering rubble of the Walker home was still glowing on the ground, with David Walker's son's remains somewhere in the debris, an interesting development emerged. Though some had believed the killing was due to Walker's cursing of a white woman, the idea soon began to fizzle out. Walker's property was dissolved since no one was alive to inherit the land, and it was instantly sold to David Walker's neighbor. This neighbor just happened to be in a position to stop the West Tennessee Land Company from parceling off the rights to Reelfoot Lake. Eventually, the neighbor gave up ownership of the property once the land dispute had been settled, to another white man, a man whose descendants still own the grounds to this very day. For within the land dispute of the 21-mile-long Redfoot Lake, and taken alongside other murders and lynchings in the area that occurred concurrently, a man named David Walker and his family were brutally slain without any other reason than he was a landowner, an entire family massacred so a group of men could continue to go fishing where they wanted.